Welcome to Black Hat 2025. We're here recording live from the CyberRisk TV studio at Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm your host, Matt Alderman, and joining me for this interview is Tom Pore, Associate Vice President, Sales Engineering at Pentera. Welcome, Tom.
Yeah, Matt, thanks for having me.
We're going to talk about AI and attackers. Obviously, AI is a hot topic. Everybody's talking about it. But this topic's going to talk about how AI is being used by attackers to attack applications, and then how do you prepare your organization to protect against those, right?
Right. Yeah, one of the bigger challenges that we see is applications that are being built by organizations are often novel. Like just one application that an organization is building doesn't necessarily map over to what another organization is doing.
Yeah.
And so as part of that, there's still a huge reliance today on humans to do the testing of these apps. So being context aware has become difficult, and what AI does is it gives us the ability to think and adapt like an attacker would and scale out this testing.
Yeah. But the reason we need that testing is because attackers are using artificial-based intelligence capability. They're already using it, to actually attack us. And so how do we keep up is part of the challenge here, right? Is they're constantly attacking these new applications. We can't test it manually. So how do we prepare ourselves and our applications to be in a better position against all these new attack vectors?
Yeah, so that brings in the continuous idea, right? Yeah. Which is, we're seeing, there was a state of pen testing report that showed that I think we're seeing about 36,000 attacks against our external attack infrastructure every second, right? Like the attackers are already using AI. And so if you're just doing that point in time, once or twice a year testing, like there's a massive gap, right? And we know that they're using AI today to attack your infrastructure. And so I think it becomes really important to evolve how we're assessing our applications and the security of our environments.
So you made a new announcement this week about a new capability to use AI to help with some continuous testing, right?
Right. So Pentera is well known for its continuous model of testing. We've added the AI-driven web attack testing, and what this does is it gives us the ability to dynamically generate payloads on the fly, understanding what application could exist and how are we going to exploit that to get access to data.
So I assume it's kind of like an agentic AI. Is it a bot? Or is it just the reason I'm asking is I've been building some agentic AI capabilities in my day job, right? And we're leveraging Selenium and some of the web browsing techniques to, navigate the browser and take screenshots and do some really interesting stuff. Are you using a similar capability to test these apps?
Yeah, something similar, but it's all built in. It's part of our IP. But it goes so much further than just like screenshots, right? So part of this is really identifying like PII. PII is one of the biggest challenges organizations struggle to keep internally. And so we're also leveraging the LLMs and the NLPs to be context aware across the files that Pentera gets access to. So as Pentera is progressing attacks, it'll get access to CSVs, log files, other types of data, and it starts to analyze that data to look for PII and then tie it back and become context aware, like an attacker would, like going through, finding out the data that's most valuable, and then being able to present that back as a critical finding.
Yeah, so it's learning as it's going. Not only is it navigating the website and finding all this stuff, which is in itself pretty amazing what these things can do, right? But as it finds data, it's trying to understand the context of that data. So it figures out, oh, wait, this is social security number data, or this is other types of PII
it could be
data.
Like an HR record, right? Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
And then it captures that, and it creates it as a finding. Does it then try to use it to figure out where to pivot next? Like if you think about an attacker, he says, okay, I found a trove of PII data. I have access to it, so I'm going to exfiltrate it, right, and do whatever. But then they might be able to use some of that data to now pivot to something else. How do you think through that process?
Totally. Yeah. So Pentera does that today by capturing hashes or extracting credentials. this allows us to do a significantly better job at credential extraction and being able to identify users and passwords and then re-inject that into the recursive approach that Pentera takes, essentially trying to go as deep as possible. And so this is next level.
Wow.
Right. And then the other part of this is really tying into something you mentioned, which is being context aware. So a lot of security solutions out there today are just based on English. And so part of this is being culturally and language aware. And so Pentera, leveraging AI, now gives us that ability. And so, like, an interesting fact we were talking about, so in the US culture, a default password is going to be like capital P at SSWOR0RD. But that's just the US, right? So it's about being aware of where the systems are and the types of credentials that could be leveraged. It's a very unique capability.
And the language of the website.
Absolutely.
Right? Because if it's in Portuguese, if it's in Spanish, if it's in Italian, all those have different nuances about them, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Interesting. So the other thing was system aware, I think you said, right? So understanding like the operating systems or the languages that are being used, how does that help you better test these applications as well?
Yeah, so a lot of times when somebody's going to go and try to get into a system, like they're going to throw as much at it as possible, and it could be non-specific. And so Pentera is using the data that it finds to get very targeted and become system aware, launching and dynamically building those payloads specific to the application that it's enumerating.
Yeah, so I worked at both Qualys and Tenable back in the early days, vulnerability scanning, right? The first thing you had to do was understand the operating system, because certain CVEs, certain checks weren't valid on certain operating systems. So it's a similar process, right? Is once you understand the OS or the language, then certain attacks apply, other attacks don't, which I assume makes the testing a little faster and a little more specific than just trying to throw everything in the kitchen sink at it.
Yeah, but it could even be down to like, how is this application handling authentication? Right, and going even deeper. And so it's about like crafting it in a way like, hey, we understand that this system, maybe it's a WebLogic system and it handles authentication differently. So like, why would we throw any other attack type to authenticate in, or we'll just do something very specific to what we find.
So let's talk about authentication for a second, because I think it's a really interesting challenge when it comes to testing and automated testing, because there's so many different ways to authenticate to systems, right? Username, password, username, move forward to password screen, then you get the multi-factor in there. How have you solved for some of those challenges? Because in order to scale this kind of testing out, you have to be efficient at authenticating to these apps in order to test them.
Yeah, so it's a great question, right? And so a lot of times what we'll find is multi-factor authentication, any type of MFA is not enabled, right? and so we bring in, the context aware based on what we find, as far as the PII, and then we've got built-in password cracking. We can tie in lead credentials, and so we're leveraging all of this in order to progress that attack and check, hey, can we actually log into this application? Like, how far can we get? What is the data that we can extract out of it? Yeah, and then it's going to go into the concept of, hey, well, we had this supply chain user credential who had access, and now we see that as a leaked identity, and now we can start to ask some questions about, hey, what is this? What data was at risk based on this supply chain?
And let me guess, you do find hard-coded keys and credentials, I would imagine, in some of these files that you're testing for.
Oh, of course.
Because people leave them around all the time.
Yeah, all the time. Yeah, like GitHub repos. Love finding, developer workstations with like any sort of hard-coded credential.
Hard-coded API keys in them.
Yeah. And I think, what this ability gives us, it's easier. It's not just a regular expression, right? So you're not looking for just a username and password next to each other anymore. It's about, being context aware and understanding, hey, there's this authentication token associated to an identity. They're in like separate files. And so we're going to be able to tie those together and then create that authentication.
Got it.
Yeah.
So where does AI take us into the future from an attack perspective and a defense perspective? Because both are going to accelerate. My guess is, as defenders, we're behind because attackers are already using AI. But what's the future look like in this kind of AI arms race when it comes to offense and defense?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and we're moving to something that we'll call vibe red teaming, right? Which is the ability to take the user out of defining the target and start crafting, language. Like let's use this example of a leaked identity for supply chain and say, hey, based on George at contractor.io who had this leaked identity, does an attack path exist, or can that user access any payroll or finance data? And now the solution will automatically build the target, test, and perform all the testing. It'll do the dynamic payload generation. It'll find the attack path that exists, taking any sort of operator out of the question.
Yeah.
But we're also introducing live red teaming, which we'd be able to also on the fly add context, remove context. Like if we started getting access to, say, developer assets, we could come in and say, no, remove developer assets. This is a red team engagement for finance or payroll only.
Because vibe coding has been a hot topic lately. I was telling you before we started, my board's like, hey, can't you just replace all your engineers with, 4 vibe coders out of India? It doesn't quite work that way, but it does produce some really interesting code. And as an attacker, so here's the rub I see in the industry. The attackers don't care if the code's secure or not. They're using it to attack stuff, right? But for us as defenders to use vibe coding, the code needs to be more secure because we don't want it to do something malicious to our environment. So we're in this interesting quandary where the attackers can use vibe coding to generate code very quickly to use as an attack, but are we in a position to use it on the other side? And so it sounds like it's using this vibe red teaming concept to build payloads and things to help protect against it, but with more guardrails and like a true vibe coding environment.
Totally. And I think the big thing that's missing is the acting as the adversary. And that's missing almost any type of defensive solution that you've got out there. And so Pentera's bringing that, now leveraging AI to ask the question like, hey, what is the impact based on any sort of security gap?
Yeah.
And based on my experience with vibe coding, there's a lot of gaps. Yeah. Right. You can tell it to be as secure as possible, but it's still not secure. Yeah, it's still not secure.
It's not there yet. Right. And I've seen other solutions that are trying to make it more secure, but it's not secure. But the attackers don't care.
They don't care.
They'll
take advantage of it. Yeah.
So I'm a CISO at a Fortune 100 company with lots of brand new web applications. Where do I start? Where do I start this journey? Do I start with this new AI attack web capabilities, or do I start even more simply, right?
Yeah, so I think as a CISO, you're probably having anywhere between 40 and maybe even up as high as 70 or 80 different security solutions out there. And you're probably doing some sort of testing capability once, twice, or if you have compliance, maybe quarterly. But at the rate that your organizations are moving digital transformation, you want to be adopting some sort of continuous testing capability. So the first thing I would do is I would say, hey, let's look in the mirror. Let's figure out what are we testing? What's our coverage? Are we only testing a small environment? Are we only testing one specific application? And I would and start to ask hey, how do we progress this? How do we build a program of continuous testing? And then how do we introduce and leverage AI? And Pentera is a great way to start helping answer those questions and guiding and say, hey, here's a way to look at your program today and areas that would need improvement.
Yeah, because I think that's the hardest part. People just need a starting point, right?
Right. Yep.
Yeah. And so start with continuous testing and move on from there.
Absolutely.
Tom, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Matt.
Yes. Yeah. To find out more about Pentera, please visit securityweekly.com/PenteraBH. And for all your Black Hat coverage, please visit securityweekly.com/Black Hat. Thanks again, Tom.
Thank you very much.
Stay tuned. We have more live interviews coming from Black Hat 2025.